asking for more regulation sometimes is, especially in a deregulatory environment, is a position that there's some give and take, but we believe that it's important for MoCRA to be implemented.
Hello, welcome to FDA Watch. I'm Wayne Pines. I've been involved with FDA in one way or another for several decades. I was an associate commissioner at FDA, and I've authored or edited 16 books about the agency.
And I'm Shelly Garg. I'm the managing partner and founder of Garg Law, a full-service FDA-focused law firm. I have been on the private side advising companies on regulatory compliance and enforcement for the last 15 years.
By now, you know what to expect from FDA Watch. We're an independent, nonpartisan national forum for discussing the latest developments and trends and issues surrounding FDA.
And if you haven't subscribed yet, do so today at fdawatch.net. You'll be the first to receive an email when a new episode drops, including bonus episodes when there's breaking news. Plus, you'll get quick access to our headlines and resource links, as well as some background about our guests.
And in this episode, we're going to focus on cosmetics regulation, including the implementation of MoCRA and the impact of administration changes on cosmetics enforcement. We have an outstanding guest to help us discuss these very important topics, and you'll meet her in just a moment.
First, let's get to some headlines.
First up is general news. Very important announcement by HHS and FDA. They announced the launch of a public request for information to identify and perhaps eliminate outdated or unnecessary regulations. This comes as part of a broader effort to reduce regulatory burdens, to increase transparency. President Trump's executive order was titled Unleashing Prosperity Through Deregulation. The new HHS Secretary, Robert Kennedy, said he is committed to a 10-to-1 policy, meaning that for every new regulation or guidance proposed, 10 existing regulations or guidances will be rescinded. According to an FDA news release under this executive order, HHS will also aim for the total cost of all new regulations in fiscal year 2025 to be significantly less than zero. They want to expand the scope of deregulation to include guidance documents, memoranda, policy statements, and similar directives, and to publish annual reports detailing costs and outlining the specific rules being offset. This is a very important development, and anybody who is interested in pursuing that should get in touch with the documents that enable us to comment on the RFI, the request for information. Let me move on to the Pharma desk. Again, a highly publicized announcement on COVID vaccines. There's been a change in FDA's views on COVID vaccines. Now, the vaccine, as far as FDA is concerned, as far as this administration is concerned, should be only for people at risk or for those over 65. And the agency has also said that all future vaccines for COVID will be tested against a placebo. This is a very important policy development. We're seeing FDA Commissioner Marty McCarry implement what I'd call a more cautious approach to vaccines. Of course, that was promised by Secretary Kennedy over the years. McCarry also said in a speech that he will unleash a massive framework for vaccines. Let me quote him. "We want to create a framework for vaccine makers that they can use so they have a predictable FDA where they don't have to worry." We're going to monitor this situation very closely because it's a very important development. We'll see how FDA regulates vaccines. It's obviously front page news. Now from the device desk, FDA approved the first at-home cervical cancer testing kit. It's made by Teal Health. It's called the Teal Wand. It was approved for home use. It offers a new way to collect vaginal samples that can detect the HPV virus that causes cervical cancer. Tests can be collected at home, then shipped to a laboratory. The kit does require a prescription that can be obtained through one of Teal Health's online health providers. So the bottom line here is that CDRH continues to approve new products. We're going to continue to monitor the approval process at CDRH and throughout the FDA as the FDA goes through the transition that we're all aware of.
Thanks, Wayne. From the Foods Desk, FDA is launching what it calls a more robust, transparent post-market chemical review program for food. The agency is launching a stronger, more systematic review process for food chemicals already on the market, according to a news release. FDA said it will roll out several actions over the coming months, including a modernized, evidence-based prioritization scheme for reviewing existing chemicals, for which a draft will be released soon for public comment, as well as an updated list of chemicals under review. The chemicals do include BHT, BHA, and ADA. The release also noted that FDA will take steps to expedite its review of chemicals currently under review, such as phthalates and titanium dioxide. We will surely hear a lot more news surrounding this issue as the new FDA leadership continues to take action. In the meantime, if you have not already, we encourage you to check out our latest podcast on food, in which Martin Hahn and Tony Pavel passionately break down the state of our food supply and the global landscape. From the cosmetics desk, FDA issues a warning about 2 tattoo inks found to be contaminated with harmful bacteria. Through testing, FDA found the presence of microorganisms in Raven Black and Sunny Days inks. These bacteria can reportedly cause infections when tattooed into the skin, with symptoms ranging from red bumps and rashes to possible scarring. They may also cause allergic reactions. FDA is advising consumers to not get tattoos with these inks and is asking tattoo artists and retailers to halt the use and sale of them. Now, Wayne, let's meet our incredible guest.
Joining us today is Emily Manoso. She's the Executive Vice President of Legal and Regulatory Affairs and General Counsel at the Personal Care Product Council. She previously served as a trial attorney in the Department of Justice and as the Council's Associate General Counsel and Staff Counsel. Welcome to FDA Watch, Emily.
Thanks, Wayne and Shelly. It's nice to be here today.
Thanks, Emily. So we'd like to jump right into it. Given that MoCRA, the Modernization of Cosmetics Regulation Act, marks really the most significant expansion of FDA's authority over cosmetics in decades. Can you walk us through, Emily, the current phase of implementation, particularly, how the agency is balancing enforcement discretion with the rollout of key provisions like cosmetic facility registrations, product listings, and safety substantiation? And then, to what extent is FDA prioritizing education and industry collaboration over formal enforcement at this stage?
Yeah, those are great questions. So, you really teed this up nicely by framing this as sort of one of the more significant updates to cosmetics regulation in quite some time. And really getting MoCRA passed was something that PCPC, worked with a large group of stakeholders for many years to see through. So we were, we remain committed to seeing MoCRA successfully implemented. Sure. Under the current administration. And so I think really the first key provisions that we have seen that I would describe as sort of new authorities were the registration and listing. So the registration of cosmetic facilities and the listing of cosmetic products, with all of the caveats in terms of who has to register and list. So those compliance deadlines went into effect this past July. We worked at every possible opportunity. So as the FDA was implementing, the portal, Cosmetics Direct, what format, the types of questions, who needed to list or report, sort of those details. We had a working group of our members that were just devoted to the registration and listing implementation, and we provided comments to the FDA, and tried to work as collaboratively as possible as we could with the agency and our members, to make the portal efficient and workable for industry, and also providing FDA with the type of information that it needed to fulfill its obligations under MoCRA. So I think that's kind of been the first, I would say, large piece of implementation
Yeah.
that's taken place, where we kind of provided those comments. But we've also just internally been working to gather our positions and better understand where membership is when further rulemakings from FDA are released. So thinking, for example, on good manufacturing practices, the GMP rule,
Hmm.
the disclosure of fragrance allergens. So, we have working groups on those two components, and look forward to those regulations being proposed.
Yeah, no, thanks, Emily, for that helpful background. I think with respect to registration and listing, obviously it went into effect, last July 24, and there were a number of other provisions like adverse event
Yes,
reporting, safety substantiation that are now mandatory
yes,
under MoCRA. But can you just comment, on enforcement? Because I think that's sort of, it's like in my area of work, Emily, we have clients that say, well, I know this is required, but is FDA actually enforcing? Do they have the dollars to enforce? Do they have the experts to enforce? So I'm wondering if you have any specific guidance on that, just what that looks like at the agency and how you see it evolving over the next 1 to 3 years.
sure. We have not heard from many of our membership about receiving specific enforcement
Sure.
actions. So, I think it's a little bit chicken and egg. Does that mean
Mm-hmm.
there isn't enforcement happening, or is it just that the nature is not something that, is disclosed to
Right.
the wider public? So I think from our perspective, we have not heard a lot of concern or feedback on the enforcement of the registration and listing.
Okay.
I'd also note that um, the information that FDA has released about the number of facilities
Yes.
and products listed is pretty significantly higher
Right.
than
Yeah.
when the system was a voluntary system. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
to us, I think that would show that people are taking seriously their obligation
Right.
to register and list.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think we similarly advise, of course, that because it is mandatory, it is required,
Yeah,
and sort of best practice to abide by the requirements, unless, of course, company's a small business, and that the rollout of enforcement will likely happen over time, but that you don't want to wait until to the 11th hour to start
right.
making those changes. So absolutely,
Right. Yeah. And I think, with some other components to MoCRA, when you talk about record keeping, the more that companies
sure,
can kind of go ahead and start building those compliance skill sets and
yeah,
toolboxes to the extent they're not already doing so, really is in their, is in everyone's interest, both
yeah,
from the company and obviously, the regulator's standpoint too.
sure, sure.
And let me ask a question: Is FDA doing what you would expect them to do in terms of educating the industry about what needs to be done so that there can be compliance?
I think so. For PCPC's membership, we certainly do have smaller and medium-sized companies. We also represent some of the larger, companies and corporations, and so I think our membership was very engaged in the process. They were well aware of the requirements, from FDA, and just were generally, involved in the laws and MoCRA's passage. So I think we had a very engaged membership where maybe the education component, I don't want to say it's not that it wasn't a concern, but we were dealing with an educated audience. And from our standpoint, we have tried to educate others as well as PCPC. So our different departments host webinars for uh, our international cosmetics trade associations that we work closely with. For instance, maybe that's Cosmetics Europe, which is the trade association for the cosmetics industry in the European Union. We we would host, webinars detailing MoCRA generally, but also focusing specifically on the registration and listing. We have speakers going to other, conferences, trade shows, presenting on MoCRA and specific on the registration and listing. So we have certainly tried to do our part as an industry trade association to educate a wide audience as well.
In terms of the way that FDA assesses the safety of cosmetic ingredients, how has that changed with MoCRA, if at all?
I think our position is that it didn't really change the safety substantiation standard. There may be differences in some record keeping requirements related to how you are documenting that your product is substantiated for safety. But in our view, we did not see this as a change to the standard.
We all know that there have been changes at the agency over the past few months. How have the changes affected the implementation of MoCRA or cosmetics regulation in general?
I think we still have an acting director, I believe, or maybe it's the deputy director. I apologize that I don't remember offhand. But in January, the longtime director of the office within FDA that sort of oversees cosmetics directly, that director, Dr. Linda Katz, retired. She had been at FDA for quite some time. And so I don't believe that there's been an official appointment to her position. So they have an acting director right now. So that still is something, that we're waiting to see who might be the long-term director in sort of that division at FDA.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add on two comments. One on the long-term safety data piece, Emily. I think that would likely be enforced via ultimately GMP inspections once that rule is final, and also through record keeping. Because what I've found is that the prior regulation, which I think it was 21 CFR 740.10, the regulation that permitted a product or a company to say, warning, this product has not been substantiated, is no longer valid under MoCRA, right? Because the safety substantiation requirement essentially negates that. So I think that via GMP inspections and record keeping, the idea is that would be addressed. So we will take a quick break right now, but please don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
And we're back. We're talking about cosmetics regulation and enforcement and MoCRA with Emily Manoso of PC. Thanks for, again, joining us, Emily. We really appreciate your time in joining our podcast.
Turning now to sort of the import side, and supply chain, with a global supply chain and many overseas manufacturers, can you comment on how FDA verifies compliance for imported cosmetics, and what new tools, digital or otherwise, are being used to improve oversight in your view? Just again, your perspective on behalf of the organization and on behalf of PCPC.
Sure. So obviously there are requirements for foreign facilities to register and list. So that is a new tool that is consistent in the sense that that's an obligation for both domestic and foreign, foreign companies that are selling or marketing into the US. So I think that is a new tool. You've seen announcements from FDA recently about prioritizing unannounced inspections at facilities based outside of the US. And so, to my knowledge, that has been thus far focused, either in the food or the pharmaceutical drug space. But I imagine that the same kind of concept could apply to, cosmetic facilities, although that type of announcement directly has not been made, at least not to my knowledge. But I think that is something that you could see more of, and would maybe perhaps align with the Trump administration's, focus on American manufacturing,
Sure.
American, supply chain, and so forth. So perhaps an increased incidence of unannounced inspections, or at least more frequent inspections of facilities that are based outside of the U.S. Certainly, we have seen, products sometimes are stopped at points of entry, so by Customs and Border Patrol agents and officials, whether that might be for an ingredient that is perhaps not approved for use in the US,
Mm-hmm.
or there's some question about that. Sometimes that happens with certain
Yeah.
coloring agents, color additives.
Color
They may
additives.
be
Yeah,
approved
sure.
for use in another market, but not in the US. So I think that is, something that we see. What I'm kind of curious to watch for in the next few years is to see how artificial intelligence might shape that question. Do you use
Mm-hmm.
different AI based tools to help screen products as they're coming through import?
Mm.
We've also seen, I think it was the Commerce Department. I'm not positive on which agency or department, but changes to the import de minimis rule. So there are thresholds, right, for certain tax purposes and,
Right.
and things outside of our FDA core space, but which I think could have impact on the import of cosmetic products
Yeah.
into the
Yeah.
US in a broader sense.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think they've either changed or waived the de minimis threshold, right? So
Yes,
that
it's
that
lower. It's
it's
lower
yeah,
now,
it's lower,
or
right?
rates
So that
lower.
it's no longer like there's kind of they're trying to catch more product coming in, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Um, I agree, and I think I've seen in our practice, cosmetic import detentions or cosmetic import alerts, either targeting quality and safety, and or unapproved drug claims. I think
Yep.
that's always sort of the hot topic issue, the distinction between a cosmetic and a drug, and stepping over the line, or sort of being in a hairy space, and products that are being unauthorized, unauthorized marketing of cosmetics for indications that really, should be under the purview of a drug or OTC drug. So, no, I certainly agree with you.
Yeah. Emily, you mentioned AI. I'm glad you did. On this podcast, we've had a number of episodes about AI, and everybody predicts that it's going to have a major impact on FDA regulation, on FDA generally, and on the world in general. Do you see your manufacturers increasingly using AI? And in addition to the import area, what other areas are they using AI for?
I think that's a good question, and probably is very dependent on each individual manufacturer. What I can tell you is, just by way of an example, we had a conference last week that we hosted, and we had a session devoted to the use of AI in digital advertising. So I know
Mhm.
that's just one component, but we know that that is an area that members are using. At least some companies are using AI for, whether that is to help them write copy on, a social media post, or help develop their image, maybe their mock-up for potential labeling, or an ad campaign. In that session, though, was also really important. The discussion focused on, wanting to be sure that you're using AI responsibly, and making sure that you have check marks along the way that involve an actual person still, for
Mhm.
instance, from a copyright perspective, or patent. So I do agree that I think it's going to be used more. I don't want to speak for FDA, but I would imagine one area they might implement AI could be just in processing large volumes of submitted data that they receive, or processing the comments that they receive during proposed rulemakings. You could easily see how using an AI tool could help you at least synthesize and summarize the different types of comments that you receive, so that you, as the agency, to comply with the Administrative Procedures Act, could respond to those groups of comments.
Yeah. I want to ask you a question about enforcement. Historically, FDA enforcement in the cosmetics area has focused on egregious violations. Given the new environment at FDA, do you think there will be any change in the enforcement policies that they implement? Do you think that'll be changing? And is the industry anticipating any changes?
I've not heard really one way or the other from our membership on that point.
I'll say, Wayne, I'll kind of weigh in here. I think that given, you know, how MoCRA is reshaping the requirements, regulatory oversight, the interest in ensuring cosmetics are sort of, in parallel regulated to the same extent as other categories. I personally see that there will be a more proactive shift towards enforcement, and that it's not going to be as reactive, in terms of color additive compliance or sort of, the drug cosmetic distinction, but it will be more on, quality, safety and record keeping, fragrance, allergen, labeling, and things of that nature. So I think the industry and certainly PCPC has been a force in ushering MoCRA's enactment. But I think that the industry has pushed for this for a number of years, and that it may take a little time to see full force and enforcement effect, but that it's sort of on the horizon. Emily, well, I just sort of hinted at this, but I'd like to talk to you more about allergens, and particularly undisclosed fragrance allergens, which, have been a growing concern among consumers and dermatologists, et cetera. Can you talk about how FDA's fragrance allergen labeling rule, will result in greater transparency and regulation around known cosmetic allergens? Are we likely to see alignment with international standards like the EU's approach, to fragrance allergen disclosure requirements? So just sort of what your perspectives are on that issue.
Yes, sure. So, we generally, as a basic principle, prefer to see harmonized approaches where possible, whether that is harmonization in the US states, harmonization between Canadian and US markets, the EU, sort of global, as much harmonization across all markets that we can achieve is sort of something we always prefer to see, simply because we have so many companies that sell into multiple markets, and having to navigate competing laws. Sometimes laws are in conflict with one another between one state or another state, or, country markets are different. So in terms of the fragrance allergen, I think generally, yes, we would prefer to see harmonization with other approaches where that's possible. And, beyond that, I think it's really going to come down to the specifics of the rule that FDA eventually publishes. So it's hard to speculate and say right now without any kind of further details from FDA.
Yeah.
But just to be able to answer your question on the harmonization, yes, we like harmonization.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
Okay. And Emily, I want to, ask you one general question, and that is, just an overview as to MoCRA and how the cosmetics industry is going to be interacting with FDA on it. Again, given the new environment at the agency, given the possibility, although we don't know, of a cutback in staff, given clearly the emphasis by the leadership of the agency on a number of different topics. How are you going to be interacting with the agency, and what do you hope that they do and that the industry accomplishes?
Yes. So again, we do still support seeing MoCRA fully implemented. And you're right that asking for more regulation sometimes is especially in a deregulatory environment, is a position that there's some give and take. But we believe that it's important for MoCRA to be implemented, in part because some of the reasons motivating our advocacy for MoCRA was to avoid patchwork regulation by states. And on that level, seeing national uniformity, seeing regulations issued which could have preemptive effect is really important. In particular, the GMP rule, we think that's really something that's, all of it is important, no doubt. But that is an area that we would really like to see the proposed rule from FDA issue. And so I think it's about framing why this is still efficient for the government, for consumers, for industry, why having a federal framework is really, in our view, is beneficial for everyone. You were mentioning sort of at the outset in the intros about the different deregulatory comments and initiatives taking place across sort of the whole of the federal government. And we submitted some comments, I guess, a week or two ago now to the Office of Management and Budget. They had a similar request. And some of it is, updating regulations and removing regulations that are now, sort of mooted or superfluous because of MoCRA. So for instance, the VCRP regulations. The VCRP was the Voluntary Cosmetic Reporting Program. Those regulations are still there, but now sort of made obsolete by MoCRA's requirements. So things like that, I think, are ways that we could still achieve, implementation of MoCRA fully, while also fitting within the Trump administration's broader deregulatory goals.
Right, and as I mentioned at the top of the podcast, FDA is actively soliciting lists of regulations and guidances and policies that are outdated and that can be changed or revoked. And so I presume that you're going to be participating in that process.
Yes, I think that is a fair assumption.
All right. We're going to turn briefly to our resource link segment, where we provide you with some valuable links that you might want to check out. So, Shelly, let's share them with our audience right now.
Will do, Wayne, but I want to first point out that these links will be included on our website, fdawatch.net, so there is no need to write anything down.
Our first resource link comes from Reuters, the news service, and they report that U.S. biotechs are considering moving early stage trials of new drugs outside of the U.S. The story said that worry grows that layoffs and policy changes under the new administration could delay reviews, can affect the whole process of drug development and how new drugs are being brought to market. There have been reports that some biotech stakeholders have said that changes at FDA has prompted some firms to launch their trials in the EU, in Australia, in other parts of the world, and engaging with regulators in those regions earlier in the drug development process appears to be somewhat easier than at FDA. So we'll follow that. That's a very important mega development in terms of where research and where drug development takes place. Our device resource link deals with a story from RAPS. A new study shows clinical performance data for medical devices with AI features is often unavailable, making it difficult to assess real-world outcomes and potentially jeopardizing safety. The study looked at 903 products and found that nearly 77% of them were used in radiology applications, and clinical performance studies were available for just 55.9%, 56% of the products at the time of FDA clearance. The author said that an AI device developed and validated in one country or region might not perform equally well in another country with a different patient population. And that makes it hard to generalize AI models on a global level. The use of AI for medical devices is crucial, but it remains very, very challenging. That's what basically the study said. And we're going to be watching that. If you haven't heard any of our three-part AI series, which we did with the law firm Arnold & Porter, We urge you to do so. All 3 episodes are available at fdawatch.net. That's fdawatch.net. Click AI series at the top of our homepage to listen to all 3.
Thanks, Wayne. Let's look at our foods link. FDA and the National Institutes of Health, NIH, announced a joint research initiative that will serve as a key element in fulfilling HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s commitment to make America healthy again, according to the NIH news release. Under this new nutrition regulatory science program, FDA and NIH will, quote, implement and accelerate a comprehensive nutrition research agenda that will provide critical information to inform effective food and nutrition policy actions, the release said. The program will aim to answer questions such as how and why ultra-processed foods can harm public health, how certain food additives affect metabolic health and possibly can contribute to chronic disease, and the role of maternal and infant dietary exposures on health outcomes across the lifespan, including autoimmune diseases. The link to the NIH news release is available at fdawatch.net. Again, we encourage you to check out our last food focused episode with Martin Hahn and Tony Pavel. It's a must listen as we continue to watch issues surrounding FDA and food. And finally, let's turn to our cosmetics link. Registration is open for PCPC's Science Symposium and Expo October 28th and 29th in Arlington, Virginia. According to PCPC's website, thought leaders from the federal government, academia, and the medical community, as well as other notable cosmetics and personal care product experts will be on hand. Attendees will have the opportunity to engage with industry experts and ask questions about industry challenges. And while it's coincidental that Emily's on the podcast, we are sort of promoting this event. It's really, in all honesty, a key event amid a rapidly evolving FDA. And it's important for any one who's listening, who's affected or impacted by the changing cosmetic regulations, to be available and to listen in on the great programming that PCPC has to offer. The link to register for the event, as well as all of our resource links, are available at fdawatch.net. And on that note, Wayne, it's time to thank Emily for really being an incredible, insightful guest on this episode. Thank you so much, Emily, for your time and expertise.
Thank you again for having me.
We'd also like to thank our podcast creator and executive producer, Michael Levin Epstein, and our assistant producer, Sam Hoffmeister.
And Shelly, one final message for our subscribers and for those who are listening to this podcast. If you want to suggest or be a guest on our show, or want to be a marketing partner or a sponsor, or just comment, you can contact us at info@fdawatch.net. I'll repeat that, info, I-N-F-O, at fdawatch.net. Check out our website. We've said it many times, fdawatch.net. Finally, we'd appreciate, if you're so inclined, to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. It really does make a difference. And please remember to follow us and to subscribe. Make sure that your family, your friends, everybody you know subscribes. That's the only way to make sure that you and others won't miss a single episode of FDA Watch.
And as we say at the end of every episode of FDA Watch, if you really want to watch what FDA is doing, listen to FDA Watch.